Hey everyone, it's Satvik Alawalia, your host, and welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm joined by President Ed Espinosa, Advocacy Director Diana Gomez, and Communications Director Wesley Story. This week we're covering three big stories. 1, updates on redistricting. 2, COVID lawsuits and vaccine mandate bans. And 3, attacks on trans kids. But this is a happy hour, so what's everyone drinking today? I have nothing, I got to admit. I don't have anything to drink. We're still unpacking. Wesley, what do you got?
I am drinking a Moscow Mule.
Oh, nice.
Mostly because I had the cup and I wanted to show it off. But
Fancy.
Is there any collusion going on right now, Wesley? Do you need to know something about you?
No, not at all.
No. Okay, good. What about you, Diana?
I have what I have every week. Truly.
A truly good
Most
opportunity
weeks.
for sponsorship, if you ask me.
Yes,
Truly.
truly.
And Ed, last but not least, our roast master. How are you doing? What are you drinking?
Speaking of last night's roast, I got a cold brew today. I brewed coffee from locally brewed here in Austin. Also sponsorship opportunity. If you're listening, hi brew. We drink it all the time. We stock it here in the fridge next to the beers that I usually have. So much needed today after a late night last night.
And, you know, there's been a lot of late nights recently with our so-called leaders in the Capitol voting on redistricting. Ed,
You didn't give me a chance to talk about the roast. You just like completely jumped over the roast. I was waiting for you to team me up to say, well, tell me a little bit about what we did last night, Ed.
Well, you should. I got to get there, right? So I was going to say, and, you know, if you've listened to all this bad news, Ed got to roasting the legislator last night. And in addition to talking about the new lines, tell us about the roast and what happened and what people missed out on.
Nice save, Satvik. So last night, Progress Texas got together with some of our friends, Wendy Davis, Jamar Brown, Cliff Walker, Glenn Smith, Sonia Van Meter, Genevieve Van Cleave, just a bunch of characters from around town, famous and infamous. And we held a roast of the 87th legislature. It was a private event. It was hilarious. We don't have any video of it. We don't have any audio of it. So you just have to take our word that it was a pretty good time. But normally when you're roasting an entity, you have that person there. We did not have the legislature with us. We took some creative liberties on this kind of roast. And it was better that way. Because after, as I said last night, after a year of verbal abuse from the ledge, we had a chance to give some back. And that's what we did. And it was
very cathartic.
Yeah.
It was cathartic. It was the best political event I've ever been to. Said,
you've been to other Progress Texas events.
Which were also good, but this was the best one.
Honestly, I have to agree with Satvik. I've been to a lot, but this was definitely my favorite. Diana and I were in the back of the room during the roast, and we were just like falling over laughing because, I mean, like you said, Satvik, it was super cathartic after this year of hell that we've been through.
And I mean, as the newest employee here, this was my first big Progress Texas event. So as far as I know, the bar said, hi, this is how the events all go.
Yeah, they're all going to be just like that, Diana.
The pressure's on.
And a tip of the hat to our writers who helped us put together the scripts and the jokes. Yeah, it's a good time. No, like I said, no audio, no video, but we will have pictures. No audio, no video in order to protect the not so innocent from the
right. And those pictures, unlike the maps they've drawn, you know, the pictures of the maps they've drawn for our state are great, but the pictures that the legislators are creating for our districts are really ugly. And Ed, you know way more about that than I do, so I'm going to give you the floor, so to speak.
Thank you, Segway Master. I will talk a little bit about a redistricting update. So as you all know, we are in the thick of redistricting at the Texas legislature right now. And we have now seen the state house maps, the state senate maps, and most recently the congressional maps. The thing that is important to remember, and we have talked about it a lot here at Progress Texas, both on this podcast and on the airwaves as well, is that it's important for our political districts to look like the people who live in Texas and to look like the people who helped us get the expanded seats in Congress. But that's not what is happening with these districts. And I have some numbers that I want to read to you. Now, I put these up on Twitter at Ed Espinosa. I think they're also up at Progress Texas as well. Texas House passed some extremely gerrymandered maps. The white population in Texas is 40%. 40% of the people who live here are white. That population controls roughly 60% of the political districts because of the way they've been sliced up. Now, the Latino population is also roughly 40% of the state, but controls 20% of the districts. Black population is 12% of the state, but controls less than 3% of the districts. And of course, by control, what we mean is, are these minority opportunity districts? Are these districts that are truly representative of these communities, or have they been packed and cracked, which we've talked about many times before, what packing and cracking is. And what we can see by these percentages, that numbers don't lie. And what these numbers tell us is that they have been packed and cracked to represent something that does not reflect our reality in this state. So it's very frustrating. And it has it's very frustrating, but it's not very surprising. A not so happy note to the start of our happy hour, right?
Well, drink to that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let me tell you a little bit more then while we are pondering those numbers. Earlier this week, the maps for the new state legislative districts passed out of the House. Passed out of committee at 3:30 in the morning. The hearing for those maps was at 10 a.m. the same morning, 6.5 hours later. No sufficient public notice, no testimony from experts, no amendments made to the committee recommendation. Wesley, I think you followed some of this. Dana, I think you did as well, being our legislative leads. But this is, they literally passed the maps in the middle of the night. So what this tells us, and we've talked about this before as well, but I'll emphasize this again. It tells us that a court case is imminent, that we will see these maps challenged, not only by how they were drawn, but by how they conducted the process to get us here.
And haven't like every single one of the maps that have come out of the ledge been challenged in court?
Yeah, ever since the Voting Rights Act passed in 1965, Texas maps have been in court every time there's been redistricting each 10 years. So I don't expect that. There's no reason to expect that to be any different this time. Old habits die hard, I guess.
Yeah, so like you said, Ed, it's been a really busy week in the ledge. At the beginning of the week, the House had the full House met and ended up voting, like you said, at 3:30 a.m. Tuesday morning on the House maps. But then also yesterday, there was a hearing on the congressional maps, and the House committee passed them through as well. And that was the hearing yesterday was the one that we had hardly any advance notice for. So on Tuesday in the afternoon, they announced that they were going to be taking them up on yesterday during their committee hearing. And people had until 10 p.m. on Tuesday night, after finding out at around 3 p.m. that they were going to be taking up this bill. They had until 10 p.m. to register to testify the next day. And so, like you said, that is something that's really important to note, because courts will take all of that into account whenever they're deciding what to do about these maps. And the fact that Texans are being restricted from participating in this process, it's been super inaccessible. And so I think that's something that I think folks need to be aware of. And I wanted to ask you if in the past, if you've seen this be the case in former, I know it's been 10 years now, but how this process typically goes. Do you feel like it's being rushed this time around, or do you feel like it's going about as the same as it always goes?
So yes, it was 10 years ago. And as you were so kind to remind me last week, you were in band, in high school band during that time 10 years ago. However, my aging memory does still serve me well. I do remember 10 years ago, I would say the timetable was about the same, but the speed of which it's going through committees and coming out is different, right? And I think what's happening this time is that the legislature is taking on so many other crazy issues at the same time. Whereas 10 years ago, I believe they may have just focused on redistricting in their special session. They also had a special session 10 years ago. It was like September or October when they did it. But here's where it goes from here. There's a lawsuit that causes an injunction against the maps. The courts would come back and make some recommendations. They would make some adjustments. Then there will be a countersuit to appeal the adjustments. There will be some sort of interim maps in the meantime. And when we have those interim maps, I don't know how revolutionary those changes will be. Probably not entirely revolutionary. They may be tweaks here and there in the most egregious areas. So for instance, the donut district might end up looking more like a croissant district with an opening at the top or something like that. I think so that's how that went last time. But let's talk a little bit about why it's like that right now and why these numbers are so drastic. Republicans are really trying to look for some sort of insulation from all of the crazy stuff they've done this session. Think back to the 2019 legislative sessions. It was one of the most civil legislative sessions we have seen in a long time. Of course, I say civil in a relative sense because it's still Texas. But think about all the crazy stuff they did after the 2020 election. They thought that their days were numbered, and they are, but they thought their days were numbered as a majority in this state. And in 2020, they broke even, right? They didn't lose any seats and didn't gain any seats. Republicans came back and they felt emboldened by that. And that's why you see so many attacks, endless attacks on abortions, on trans kids, the crazy playing to the right-wing base when it comes to COVID response, permitless carry, you name it. There's so many issues. And the way they insulate themselves from any sort of electoral accountability is by chopping up the state into a way that is unrepresentative of the state. And that's what's happening here. Again, the white population is 40% of the state. They have drawn districts so that it is nearly 60% representation in these districts. Latino population also almost 40% and is about 20% of the representation. That is, if that's not suspect, I don't know what is.
And it's interesting, Wesley, your question about the speed at which they're doing things. It reminds me of from the very beginning of the first regular session, which, God, seems like years ago now. They have been they've been working at this really high speed this whole time. It seems the way they were rushing through anti-abortion legislation and absolutely, everything else. And I know that we had that thought in the beginning of this year that, one of the reasons that they were doing this was because, if you remember, again, at the beginning of this year, there weren't that many folks that were able to go in person to testify without risking their health because vaccines weren't a thing still. And there were a lot of unvaccinated people at the Capitol, and there weren't that many precautions being taken there. And they didn't allow for any virtual testimony at that moment. So it seems like a theme of them just ramming things through as fast as possible. Obviously, also to help in the deal that they made with the devil at the beginning of the year to get 666 bills passed after the first session.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's super intentional. And I think yesterday, Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, one of our congresswomen, actually went and testified in front of the committee. And she commented on how difficult it was for her to be there and make an appearance. She knew that she wanted to show up because her district is one of the districts that's really being gerrymandered with the congressional maps. And so she wanted to speak for the people that she represents. And she said, she over hell or high water, she was going to make it to testify on these maps, but that for somebody that doesn't have the resources that she has, someone who lives in Texas, maybe too far away from the Capitol, or even just somebody who needs the time to understand these maps because they're confusing, less than a day is not enough time to do the research that you need to prepare testimony, to make the trip to Austin. And so what you're saying is true. This is intentional, and they're doing it so that they're not getting as much dissent. Because they don't like to deal with the dissent. And
legislators got COVID during this whole process.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
They're rushing through and so many of them got COVID. I got one more thing to say, and then I got to jump. We'll bring our next, Sophic, you can bring our next guest in. I talked to, so one of the segments we do, folks who follow Progress Texas know that we have a partnership with Fox 7 here in Austin. We also have a partnership with Spectrum News. So if you watch Capitol tonight in either El Paso, Dallas, San Antonio, or Austin, on Tuesdays, you can see me and Ted DeLisi, my Republican counterpart, talking about the politics news of the day. One of the things that we were talking about in the newsroom was the fact that the more special sessions Abbott holds, the less there is conversation about his two primary opponents in the race for governor. And normally a special session is not a good thing for a sitting governor. You don't want that out there. It shows you can't manage the state. It shows that you're just kind of a hot mess, which he is. But the more that we do this, the less there's conversation on Alan West, the former GOP chair who's challenging him, and Don Huffines, the state senator who's challenging the governor. So he's got some motivation here. It's a very Trumpian distraction based approach to things. But all I can say is this particular legislative session is scheduled to end on October 19th. The court cases may go on, but hopefully this is the last we'll see of the sessions this year.
We can hope.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, we need to plan you mentioned it, Wesley, another happy hour.
But not live.
Not
That
live.
won't be live.
With something really alcoholic.
All right, Ed, thank you so much for diving into the redistricting stuff. We'll talk to you later. I'm going to bring in our special guest today. Bye, Ed. So today we have with us Kathleen Thompson. She's one of our board members and a mother of three. And she's going to talk to us about a lawsuit she's a part of and just like what's going on in the fight for Texans to defeat COVID, as opposed to our governor who seems to be, COVID's biggest cheerleader. Kathleen, what are you working on?
That's right. Unfortunately, we're in a school district called Grapevine Colleyville ISD that has accepted the politicization of the pandemic. This never had to be political. Hundreds of thousands of Americans and tens of thousands of Texans would still be alive, but they have accepted the politicization. They're ignoring the CDC. They're ignoring the American Academy of Pediatrics, and our local children's hospital is called Cook's Children's. They're ignoring their advice on universal masking. And this is dangerous, and unfortunately, it's deadly. In our school district, community members, parents are dying. A school board trustee's husband just died of COVID, and the board is still unmoved. They won't take a public vote on masking. And GCISD is pointing fingers at Greg Abbott, and Greg Abbott, other folks are pointing fingers back at GCISD, but Abbott didn't order our school district to take away physical barriers or distancing or contact tracing like they had last year when cases and hospitalizations are fewer. And our school district is having weekly indoor unmasked events. And just last Friday, one of our AP government teachers attended school and was visibly ill, was pacing and shaking and coughing, and he was unmasked in my neighbor's daughter's AP government class. And now he's diagnosed with COVID and he's out for a couple of weeks. And we know that masking works. We know that vaccines work. We know that masking works. So we should be using the tools that we have at our disposal to not fight each other, but to fight this pandemic. And that's what moms like me are working on, and educators and parents and neighbors and community members are supporting this lawsuit. And we're taking it into our own hands when our leaders are failing us.
So you mentioned that you were, before the show, that you were like part of a lawsuit. Can you talk about like what exactly is going on with that? Where is it in the courts right now?
Yes, it's been filed in federal court in the Western District. Judge Pittman is the judge who is just in the news about the abortion lawsuit. And, we are people who are using the courts because we're not like others who, when we have a disagreement with our government, use violence. We're using this lawsuit as a last resort after calls and texts to the board and administration and petitions and the like have been wholly ignored. So it's been filed, and now we wait for this to work in the courts and hope that Meanwhile, our school board members will be moved, but so far they're not. And there are school districts who are like Waco, or it was just in the news again today. They're going to be doing what's best for their kids and their faculty and staff and their community, despite whatever Abbott's executive order is, and despite any threats from our indicted Attorney General.
You know, one thing that I think we've talked a lot about, and folks are familiar with the mental toll that this pandemic has had on adults and the folks who we hear from most often, but what gets ignored is the toll that it's had on children too. And so I'm interested to know how your boys feel about the fact that our schools really aren't doing what's necessary to keep them safe.
They don't understand. I have a 16-year-old and I have a 12-year-old, and they don't understand why they wear masks every day, and a lot of their friends do, but why other peers and teachers who should be setting an example, and school board trustees who, you know, attend the open meetings don't wear a mask and set a good example. And we have a 3-year-old, and she goes to a different ISD. She's in Dallas, where she's protected, and she's in a pre-K program. And we dropped off her middle schooler brother, and she said, "Put on your mask to be safe." And he turned around and he said, "You're right. You know more than what these adults here do." And that's my 3-year-old. So it's confusing for them, but they are old enough to understand that what happened in the 2020 election and what happened in 2016. And they do understand that, unfortunately, anti-scientific rhetoric is out there, and that some people are choosing politics instead of people.
Kathleen, would you mind letting us know a little bit more about like who else is involved in the lawsuit? Is it a group of parents, and what y'all are claiming in this suit? Yes. So for GCISD, there's another family. And then there are lawsuits also. Right next door is Hearst Euless Bedford. There's a Hearst Euless Bedford lawsuit, and this is a federal class action lawsuit. Our children have the right to go to school and be safe at school and receive a public education and to be safe at school. There is a national pandemic. Our children should be safe at school. And the only tools that we have right now are vaccines and masks. And as you know, not all children are old enough to be vaccinated. So we're asking not for masks for the rest of their lives until children graduate and go to college, but until the pandemic slows here in Texas. And unfortunately, the policies of Abbott and Patrick and Paxton have let COVID spread like wildfire here. And until the rates are reduced, the hospitalization rates and the infection rates are reduced, let's wear masks and get these rates lower, and then let it be a county by county decision, and let's use local control. So we're asking the federal courts to intervene and to let our children go to school safely and have a mask requirement until these numbers are brought back down. And this is serious. This isn't theoretical. People are dying, and enough Texans have died. And this isn't just numbers. These are partners who, you know, are not at the dinner table that night. These are parents who are not going to be there anymore, who don't take their kids to school anymore. And these are loved ones, and it's enough.
So, Kathleen, I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this. I have a question actually for all three of you. So, you know, we've been talking about the lawsuit that's happening that Kathleen is leading to get masks allowed into the ISD where her kids go to school. If you've been reading the news or listening to TV, you know that Governor Abbott just banned vaccine mandates and business from doing that. What is the reaction that y'all have to that, and like what impact will that have on our state? Kathleen, if you want to go first, because you've just been talking about masks.
I think that just like masks, these vaccine mandates will save lives, because our children don't live alone. what happens at mom and dad's or parents and caregivers' work comes home to the children, just like what's at school can be passed around school and comes home to younger siblings or to who can't be younger siblings who can't be vaccinated or to older relatives at work. I think that Greg Abbott needs to get out of the way of Democrats and elected officials and business leaders who are leading the fight of this pandemic. If he's not going to help, he should get out of the way. I think, isn't that what Joe Biden said earlier this summer? It's right. And the pandemic is bad for business. If you want business to be good and the economy to be good, let's fight this pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. My immediate reaction, Satvik, is just that it's hypocritical because Abbott's office is on record just a few months ago, basically saying that businesses should be able to make the decisions for themselves. And what's getting lost in this narrative is that this may not be a mask mandate, but it's still a mandate. And it's mandating that people can not require vaccinations, that businesses cannot require vaccinations. And at the end of the day, that should be their decision. So the Republican Party, Governor Abbott, is going against his own, he's contradicting his own former decisions with this mandate. He's really just throwing science out the window.
I thought it was, also interesting in the hypocritical Republican sense of you can't be told what to do with your body when, literally, what is SB 8? That is a ban, that is, could also be called a mandate. Like, people don't have the choice now, people who become pregnant, of what to do with their bodies, right? There are folks who, if they do have money or attain it somehow, they can leave the state. But as we know, our terrible healthcare system in our state negatively affects most the people who are, living in rural areas, low income, Black and brown communities. And those folks who don't have the means, will be forced into pregnancies, right? So they're being told by the government what to do. But when it comes to, positive healthcare, no, not really into that. But also, it was really disappointing, especially in thinking about a lot of Black and brown communities in our state of Texas, which have been disproportionately affected the most by COVID. Now knowing that, even if the businesses they work for wanted to require vaccines, knowing that they won't have that option was, that was disappointing.
Absolutely. I mean, he's just putting us all in danger. And it's not just about COVID. Wesley, you and I were talking earlier this week about the attacks on trans kids. And it's like, whether it's banning masks in school or stopping parents from getting vaccinated because employers can't mandate it, we're damaging our kids. And now they're attacking trans youth. And, would you mind talking a little bit about what's going on at the Hill, at the Capitol?
Yeah, for sure. And we actually just published a blog today where we talk about both of these issues. And, the title of the blog is "What's Governor Abbott's Problem with Texas Children?"
Mm-hmm.
Because it really just seems like he's out to get our kids, and it doesn't make any sense. So as we speak right now, legislators in the Texas House are debating House Bill 25, which is the trans sports ban, the bill that would make it to where kids could not compete, or trans kids could not compete on sports teams that align with their gender identity. This bill has already passed through the Senate, which means that if it passes today in the House, it'll be sent to Governor Abbott and he'll sign it into law, which is just really disappointing because we've gone through 4 sessions now. In session after session, activists, trans kids and their families have been able to stop this bill from moving forward. But Governor Abbott has been persistent, and he's continued to put this bill on the call for session after session, and it's finally close to the breaking point. It's close to passing. And so what we know is that this is, again, just another attack on Texas children, and it puts lives at risk because it stigmatizes a group that already has a higher rate of suicide, already struggles with isolation due to the discrimination that this bill promotes. An amendment was actually introduced just a little while ago from one of our Democratic reps, trying to clarify pieces of the bill and just asking that trans girls, trans kids would be allowed to still practice with the teams. So not even asking that they can compete on the actual day of the games or in competition, but maybe they could just practice with the team so they could still have a sense of team work and like getting to know one another, you know, all of those important things that sports promote. Maybe they could get that by just being able to practice. And that amendment was rejected. And so that's how you know that this has nothing to do with fair competition, as the Republicans are claiming. It's just about stigmatizing a group of kids because they're different. And this bill is wrong.
Who are they doing this for? Like, it's not for sports, but like, who are they doing this for, Wesley?
They're doing it for a few far-right votes in the primaries that are coming up in 2022. That's all they're doing it for. They're doing it for their own political agenda, for their own political careers, and they're putting the lives of kids at risk. And that's also the same reason that Abbott is passing these mandates that he's been passing, is because he's trying to compete with his far-right primary opponents.
Yeah.
And Wesley, would you mind mentioning who are some of the organizations, like our partner organizations, that are like leading on this work for folks who are concerned about this, to know about sort of who to support and follow?
Yeah, for sure. So you can follow Equality Texas. They're doing some amazing work. TINT, which is the Trans Education Network of Texas, and then also ACLU of Texas is doing a lot of work surrounding this bill as well. So all of those groups are incredible. You should definitely give them a follow if you're not already. And I know that we're a little bit over time, so I can kind of wrap it up, but I just want to say to like any trans folks out there, but especially to trans youth, that you belong in sports, you belong in our state, you belong everywhere, and don't let these ignorant lawmakers question your right to exist, because at the end of the day, you belong here, you're loved, and eventually you'll have your day. This law is not going to stay in effect. It's going to be challenged in court, and hopefully we can defeat it in the long run.
That's really well said, Wesley. I appreciate that. And I echo the same sentiments. Like, you are loved, you belong. There's not, like, you deserve everything that you want. You know, I also just want to say really quick, it's just been so impressive to see that community and all the allies mobilize over and over and over again. And that's really like what, you know, I don't want those kids to have to do it, but to see their resiliency and their strength, it's so inspiring. And I think we could all learn something from how they've just handled this with such dignity and grace.
Yeah, close to 300 people showed up last week whenever there was a hearing to testify against this bill. I mean, every single time this bill has been brought up at the legislature, there's been overwhelming opposition, and then only a few folks from the other side testifying in favor of it. So that just goes to show that the turnout has been incredible. The orgs that are doing this work are incredible, but also the trans kids and their families that have continued to turn out time and time again.
Well, Kathleen, Wesley, Diana, Ed, who had to go on to a meeting, thanks as always for lending your expertise. To everyone who's watching and listening, thanks for joining us. Head over to www.progresstexas.org to follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list. If you're listening to us right now, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. Have an amazing weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye, y'all.
Yeah, y'all.